it's a game that is a retro style shooter, which obviously I play a lot of. It's a particular favorite genre of mine.
Yeah.
Uh, and Phantom Fury, it's a sequel to Ion Fury, which is, a shooter that came out a couple years ago. Interestingly enough, Phantom Fury was actually they're both under 3D Realms, but Phantom Fury was developed by a different developer than the one that did Ion Fury.
Yes.
Oh, excuse me.
Same
So
developer that worked on the game that I talked about last week.
yes, Slipgate
In part.
Ironworks,
Yes.
and it's I have finished the game obviously, and I was really kind of conflicted on it while I was playing it.
Yeah.
There are parts of it that I like, and there are parts of it that just kind of really devolve into a bit of a mess. Um,
Yeah.
it's it's a retro style shooter. It's kind of doing this interesting thing that we've seen with other retro shooters where it's 3D, but it kind of has like pixel art textures and it kind of
Yeah.
uses like modern lighting. So like it looks old, but it also looks new. Like it looks way better than anything that, would be able to run on an old,
Right.
an old Windows PC or whatever in the 90s. So like visually it looks really like pretty nice at times.
Mm-hmm.
Uh the sound effects I really enjoyed. Like all the weapons feel like, they feel like guns. They don't feel like too weak or like too
Right.
puny
Sure.
that, certain games can have like an issue with. Uh but where I start to, run into a bit of, the more messier side of the game is in the gameplay department. And I think this you know
Oh,
again with the
sorry.
differences
You cut out
between
for a second. Could you repeat that?
oh yeah, basically the this kind of topic needs to be prefaced by highlighting the differences between Ion Fury and Phantom Fury.
Yeah.
So Ion Fury is it's a game that's developed on the Build engine, which was the engine that was primarily rose in popularity from Duke Nukem 3D.
Yeah.
And
Oh
in
yeah.
that way, it's like kind of like really early 3D, but like everything is still sprite based. So it has that very like Duke Nukem 3D look. Whereas Phantom Fury is fully 3D and it's going for more of that like, mid to late 90s shooter kind of vibe where it like kind of like games like Quake where it's, not sprite based. It's, we're starting to get like 3D characters and 3D environments.
Yeah.
And Phantom Fury specifically, like, if Ion Fury is to be compared to Duke Nukem 3D, Phantom Fury is definitely heavily inspired by Half-Life and Half-Life 2.
Yeah.
They very much are trying to have like a slower paced game that, is there's many direct comparisons to things in Half-Life with Phantom Fury.
Yeah.
There's, part of it's set in a desert, which is obviously anytime you have a first person shooter set in a desert, people are going to think Half Life. They just kind of
Yeah.
set
Yeah.
that tone out there. And even down to like some of the weapons and the amount of weapons you get are very similar to like an arsenal you will build over a Half Life game.
Yeah.
There are there's a vehicle mission in it that is very similar to like the highway mission in Half-Life 2
Mm-hmm.
or even like some, missions that you might play in like a Halo game. There's, you know, a boss fight against a helicopter, which is another very, iconic moment from the original Half-Life. So there's many things that like it kind of, borrows from Half-Life or like is trying to pay homage to. But the real issue that I had with it comes in the form of the messier parts of the game, which come from the actual like shooting and the enemies that you're fighting, because a lot of it really ends up being pretty basic. There's a lot of if an enemy's not just like running at you in a straight line to hit you with a melee attack, they're running diagonally and shooting at you with a gun. So it's like that's where most of the combat kind of comes from. And rather than introduce enemies that have like, specific weaknesses or, different tactics, most of the enemies you basically just shoot until it dies. Like
Right.
that's how the combat works in this game.
Mm-hmm.
Even extending into the bosses. The bosses, like, there are some things you can do to, exploit some certain weaknesses, but for the most part, you just shoot it until it's over. And half the time, like the enemy AI just feels kind of unfinished in parts where there were multiple times where enemies would just be standing still, not doing anything in the arena while like a partner is like shooting at me. There are, you know, being inspired by Half-Life, they were kind of one of the, I won't say they're the first, but they were one of the first big ones to popularize like physics-based, puzzles and things in the levels that you can mess around with,
Right.
with crazy physics. And Phantom Fury does this also. They have like physics puzzles. You have things that you can like pick up in a crane and move around to like open up a new path. But I couldn't shake this feeling while I was playing where I'm like, I'm just kind of doing the same things I did in Half-Life, and Half-Life was a bit more compelling. Like,
Right. Sure.
I don't mean to be, rude or anything when I say that, obviously, but, you know, there's a degree of, you're inspired by this thing and you want to, take these concepts or these aesthetics and evolve them in a certain way. But when you're taking these concepts and aesthetics and, putting them into your game and, your other systems don't back up the reason for paying homage to these, it
Mm-hmm.
just kind of, gives you, or at least for me, it gives me that feeling. It's like, well, why don't I just go play Half-Life if I want this kind of experience and I know it's, the puzzles are a bit more interesting or the enemies maybe a bit more polished with the
Sure.
AI and stuff like that. Um, Obviously this is like, Slipgate Ironworks. I don't know exactly how big they are, but obviously like it's, it's not a super high budget AAA game. Like there are certain things that, we have to take into consideration when, judging a game like this. But like even towards the end of the game, I mean, like at a certain point they just kind of stopped introducing new enemies, and the idea of challenge in the game comes from like let's just keep throwing enemies in. Like let's just keep spawning enemies, and there's this mission towards the end of the game where you're trying to like, go to this like kind of final climactic area, and it's a very long mission, which I know you were talking about with Wrath, where like the missions are kind of they're pretty long, like
Yeah.
40 minutes to an hour, if I remember you were saying
Yes. Yep.
last week. Pretty similar length here in Phantom Fury as well. Like these missions can go on for a while. Thankfully, this does have autosaves and checkpoints though, so you
Yeah.
don't have to mess around with those tether
The
things.
soul
But
tethers. Yeah.
yeah, uh, but yeah, like it just like it honestly started just becoming like running into groups of enemies like every 10 seconds, and it got to the point where I'm just like, man, this isn't engaging. They're just dumping enemies in my path
Yeah.
that are just like, peppering me constantly. Like I'm wasting all my resources fighting all these enemies, and then like it just kept going and going and going.
Yeah.
And that's where I got like really conflicted with the game, because it's like there's stuff to like here. Like it's not an objectively bad game or anything, but it definitely I think needed some more time in the oven uh, to sort of have some more developed game systems that actually warranted or you know made it feel like they were evolving on the concepts that a game like Half-Life established all these years back.